Hey folks, welcome to another episode of The Digital Drop. My name's Tab, I'm joined by Rob and Ida. Today we wanted to discuss something that a lot of our clients and organizations, new organizations approach us with around membership and how to improve their site performance. And so we just thought we'd take this episode to talk a little bit about that and a few key pointers. So we've come together with around 5 key aspects that you might want to focus on to help improve your site performance. So, Rob, do you want to throw us into what you might think are some good ideas around that?
I'll start with number 1, and that is first and foremost just listening to members. I think this is something we've spoken about a lot with our current clients and clients that approach us in terms of, getting feedback from members in terms of what they want to see from, the website experience or whatever. And that could be simply doing like manual, actual reaching out to members and doing like a questionnaire or a survey or something like that, or putting something like a feedback tool in place to allow them to actively give feedback on the website experience.
How would you, so say you get that feedback directly from members, what would be then maybe the next steps to incorporate that into what you're thinking or what you're delivering?
I think obviously in the first instance you need to get a decent amount of data first. So you can't just get like 5 responses off like a feedback widget and then go in and make them changes. You need to just sit down with whoever you're working with, whether that be an agency or your internal team, and just review what data is coming in and try and put it into sensible categories of work that can then be done and scheduled.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. I think as well from my angle, when you're looking at all these things, it's where it ties into the journey of what you're doing. So you want to collect this data, in my opinion, as early as possible, but have the thought process of where you're looking to go with that data, so you know which questions to ask and what feedback to get.
And what would be an example of the work or maybe the feedback that we've got from some of our members?
So I suppose through our sort of design processes, etc., we might, rather than put in feedback forms on, with clients we'll have had actual user interviews. So we'll interview their members, see what they think of the website, ask them positioned questions to get the answers that we want to then take to formulate into maybe it's user journey mapping or how the structure of the site goes, etc. So that's an example. I think Robert mentioned an example of feedback forms, which maybe you'll be able to highlight a little bit more on.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to your question before, it might be like, if we know a membership organisation wants to make some major changes to like their navigation, for example, we could set a widget up in place to ask people like, how they got to this area of the site or what they thought of the experience so far. And that would give us like an indication on, whether that improvement is worth doing or not.
Yeah, and look, when we talk about asking members and getting feedback, it's not just verbal written feedback. We can analyze data. So when Rob's talking about, for example, new menus, we'll have already looked, or an organization, a membership organization themselves can look into data and see what that data is telling you, because it's not just through words, it's through actions as well that we can interact with our members and understand how they're using the website. So we might look at analytics and see certain pages have high bounce rates or high drop-off rates along a certain user journey to go, okay, this is something that we need to address.
Yeah, I think in most occasions what we do is also install heat maps. So let's say if we roll out a new menu or maybe a new landing page, we'll make sure we add heat maps on pages to track to see how people really navigate, because maybe something that's logical to us, like a piece of text or something on a banner, members might think, oh, it's a clickable link, so we see people are clicking on it, and that creates a bit of confusion. So, as you said, maybe non-verbal feedback in tools like heat maps is really useful, because you see people doing things actually like performing tasks, and then you can judge your designs and how they are.
I think that's key as well, because when you use the words what makes sense to us, we're in this world, we're in this industry, the organizations and those key stakeholders in those organizations are in this industry. So what makes sense to us, we're maybe a little bit more knowledgeable in how a site works or how it should work or what something should look like, whereas the members might not be. They might be, but they also might not be. And getting that little bit of analytics, what you're talking about, will actually tell us, yeah, this is how they're actually using it, because what makes sense to us might not necessarily make sense to them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And in the past, we also had, when we get to a particular milestone within a project, we would show, let's say, new member zone or website or whatever it is, to a selected number of members, like between 50 or 100 of them. And in some cases, we do this in some sort of a user group where you have multiple people. But then on some other cases, when something is a bit, we're unsure in which direction to go, then we just do like individual calls and we show them, let's say, a black version or a white version of something. And we try to gain that feedback from them, which we really find useful. And I think, it goes back to understanding them a bit more and understanding their feedback, which gives us pretty much a roadmap for the future together with our client.
Yeah, I think like as a team, like managing a website, like you've just got to get into the habit of validating your ideas with data, and whether that be like what you can see in analytics or actually speaking to your members to find out whether what you're planning to do is worth doing. You know, and I know we always challenge our clients, you know what I mean? If they come to us and say like, you know, I want to change this header element or something like that, you've almost got to go back to them and say like, why are you doing that? What data have you seen that shows that changing that's going to improve the user experience for members? And I think it's quite easy as marketers just say I want to do this without actually looking into the data. So that's important.
Yeah, and I think, look, when we look at this as a general, we've got to look at trends. So even when you're potentially having those feedback forms, the user groups, the individual discussions, the analytics, everything, you look at the trends of what people are telling you through their actions or through their words. And you don't necessarily cater for the anomalies because they're anomalies for a reason. So it's about taking that data and digesting it to make it suitable for most, because we all know that not everything can work for everybody.
Yeah, and just to add on that, like everyone will, well, all people we interact with and ask them for feedback and survey them, they'll give us their feedback. But it doesn't mean necessarily that we should incorporate every part of that feedback, because there's got to be a bit of a strategy in terms of what we're trying to achieve, and then, as you said, filter that feedback and see really what our next steps should be.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, look, in terms of that strategy, it probably brings us on to the next thing that a membership organization can really take on board to help that experience. And I think that relates to
content.
Yeah, value and content. So
exactly. So what we find a lot is that membership organizations don't necessarily have crisp, like very clean messaging on their front page and home page. They don't necessarily shout out about their USPs or the reasons why you should become a member. And I think this in a way limits them for acquisition of new members, and in a way creates a bit of a confusion. So the most usual scenario is when you are referred by someone else to say, oh, if you want to do this, you have to join that organization, you've got to be a member, which is how most of the members actually become organization members. However, there's always that element where people are researching and they are not 100% sure, and this is really down to content, that there isn't enough content out there like right in front of someone's eyes to say, this is who we are, this is the value that we give you as an organization. And I think that value really is what people are after. And in essence, that goes hand in hand with the acquisition and prospecting.
Yeah, and I think what you said, the key part of what you said was there's not enough content in front of their eyes, because what we tend to see is membership organizations have a boatload of content, but how it's structured and where it's brought is not necessarily in the best manner. And I also feel that, and this might be more a personal thought, is a lot of membership organizations that we come across don't shout from the rooftops about their value. It's like they're a little bit shy, maybe a bit of a fear of failure of this is what we add. And so it tends to fall a lot into that bit that you said it around, oh, people will join because they have to, and not really shouting from the rooftops around the value they can add, what they're getting from the organization, the things that the membership organization is working on, because a lot of membership organizations might have direct communication with lawmakers and policy implementers in terms of what they're influencing, but they don't. The value of that is not really seen by the members because it's not really put out in front of them. And I think this is a little bit around that content. It's there usually, but where they find it is the difficult part.
You could also argue, though, I mean, we've come across some membership organisations where, like, to be a member of that organisation, it's mandatory based on, like, a certain career avenue that someone goes down. They don't offer enough value anyway, do they? You know what I mean? So maybe that's a reason why there's not that focus on content.
Yeah, and I suppose that becomes the balance between how we might help, for example, us as an agency, how we might help a membership organisation in terms of their digital strategy, but also the way that we work, we also look to match business goals with digital goals and give a thought process onto other things that organizations may be thinking of. So if, for example, you're talking about a career path, which means that you have to join a certain type of organization, well then that might be limited. So it might only be to complete certain exams. It might only be for the first 5 years of your career you have to. So then where's the lifetime value of that client or that member? And it's really about then going back and figuring out how we add additional value to those members, and where we do, how we portray that to them.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that more, like membership organisations wanting to portray the value a bit more, like, especially in the past couple of years where, like, you know, people have been reassessing their spend and stuff like that with obviously the cost of living and things. So, you know, it's good to see membership organisations actually thinking about how they can provide more value, whether that be, like you say, additional membership tiers and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be something we just see more of in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think kind of going back to your point at the outset of this, which will bring, I think, us on to point 3 of how to improve that digital performance, is the content which relates to the user experience of a site. So I know we mentioned when we were talking about that element that a lot of content might be 4, 5, 6 clicks down through a member journey, and that's not how you want to orientate a site. So really about trying to get the relevant content and the user journeys established to improve that navigation, to improve how quickly they get either down a funnel of membership, a funnel of retention, a funnel of knowledge sharing, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things that I would probably suggest for any membership organization to do is regular review of their content. Any business changes, so, you know, 1 year we might be targeting, or we might have a challenge in a particular area, and then next year it may change, and trends change as well, and just look at the needs of members before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. So the content that we used to have back then surely can't be the right content that we are still positioning, let's say, a few years later. And I think the exercise of reviewing who you are as an organization and what you're trying to say to your members should be done I would say once a year, so every 12 months. And we've helped several clients to kind of reposition themselves. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of work in terms of it's not a technical work, it's more of content and identifying what type of content you want to promote more. But it's always good from somebody like on the side, somebody like an external party, to ask you questions, to think about it. Oh, we didn't think about this. Oh yeah, that's a really, good point. So that sort of communication is something, and sort of strategy planning is something that I would definitely advise to be done on a regular basis.
And I think onto that as well, that planning, I think yearly might be excessive for what I'm going to mention, but understanding your users and the user profiles and what you want to get from your users, so that you can understand the journey that they want to take. So when we talk about this point in terms of navigation, you might have a plethora of different users that the end outcome for them is different. So as somebody who might be starting on a career path, the end outcome might be get them to take exams, understand about exams, what it takes to go on this journey. And for someone later on in their career path, it might be how they can help others within that network, within that industry, move forward. So I think that understanding your users and the journeys you want them to take really helps in dictating that journey.
Agree.
Yeah.
And I think we just touched upon navigation, which is also one of the points we had on the list.
I think that's the kind of point that we've been discussing now in terms of user journeys and the navigation of that, and which tied into the previous point of content and how we position that content to them. I suppose the next point from that would really be making your site accessible to users. So when we've got this navigation and the content in place, now accessibility might I think it's 1 in 5 people have some kind of disability in the UK. So if we're looking at the UK specifically, so that's 1 in 5 users that are potentially using our site that we need to facilitate our site for. So accessibility is really key, because not only does it position your organization in terms of you are keeping up with the standards of society, but it also means that you're facilitating for all members to use your website, you're being inclusive, which as a side effect of the inclusion that you're doing, it helps promote how your agency's thought process or your organization's thought processes, and how you look to accommodate for different types of members.
What level would you be looking to go for then?
I think for us as an agency, we try to have all our websites AA compliant, so WCAG AA compliant. Obviously there's single A and there's AAA, and I think with AAA you lose a little bit of flex in the design capabilities that you're able to have. And with AA there's still some level of restriction, but as part of that process, to make sure that you're covering everything, what you can do is you can set up a page that actually discusses your compliance and where you might not have complied, because to comply to every point can be ineffective in terms of time and cost. So you can set up a page about your compliance and put down where your exceptions are and the reasons for your exceptions, and that does suffice in terms of criteria around AA and the compliance you're achieving. So I think it's something that membership organizations are starting to realize more and more, but not everybody is there yet. And legacy websites that might be more than 3 or 4 years old are probably nowhere near there yet. So really, as you're looking to address your next project and platforms or update your existing one, it's definitely something that we need to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And there's always a little bit of that clash, as you said, in terms of creativity and accessibility. When we look at gov.uk website, that's a perfect example of what's like fully accessible and compliant. But then you want to be like a membership organization that has got some great designs and being creative and show maybe a little bit of your own brand personality and brand colors, that in a way restricts you in terms of what you can and you can't do. But there's always a middle ground to it, which I find really great, and that is there's tools out there that you can pay for, and they're not usually expensive, and you can install them like within a few clicks on your website. And what they do is there's always a little pop-up on your website, so anyone with any difficulties would be able to tone down the colors, get a text reader out, I don't know, anything that's flashy or moving or being overly dynamic on the web page will completely disappear. So there's that middle ground where you can still retain the creativity whilst also accommodating for accessibility in full, really.
Yeah, I think that middle ground is something that I've found through discussions. Membership organizations are a little bit unsure of, you know, do they have all the power within themselves and their agency to make sure that everything is accessible? And there's sometimes a little bit of give that needs to be given when you're using these accessibility tools. But you're right in terms of that creativity. It will enable you to be as creative as possible, but then use a third-party tool to kind of tone that down where applicable. And I suppose that accessibility kind of brings us on to the final point, or point 5, which is around site performance and core web vitals, which you know a little bit more about, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of site speed and core web vitals have been like a fundamental ranking factor for like a few years now. So it seems like most organizations are onto the fact that they need to have a website that loads within a couple of seconds and stuff like that. So, you know, I feel like most organizations are starting to really work to that, but it's just one of them things that if you haven't got a website that's loading within a couple of seconds now, then you're so far behind, and it's getting to the point where it's even like affecting organic traffic now, which then it'll mean less people will land on the site, less potential members will come across the organization, less potential members will sign up. So I think it's actually having a drastic effect not having, you know, a site that loads quickly. So
yeah, and I think a lot of this can be done in-house. You might not need an agency necessarily for all of these things. There's tools out there that can tell you what your current status is and where you need to improve. And what I find is that a lot of times it'll be down to content. So images might not be properly reduced or compressed in terms of the size, so they might be too heavy for the website, and that takes the page load time too long. And I mean, one of the things that I also appreciate when I'm Googling is like, if it takes more than, I'd say 3.5 seconds, that's it. I've got no patience with it, but the same applies for everyone else. So it's like, it's got to be fast and performant.
Yeah, I would say it can't be an afterthought anymore, site speed. Like accessibility for membership organisations, it has to be at the forefront of any sort of web project that you're currently working on.
Yeah, and I think, so I suppose there's 2 different elements to this. One is new web projects that you might be working on. And for that, I'd say it's very dependent or very important for the agency to start dictating back, and dictating might be the correct word to use in this, or definitely highlighting the impact of certain functionality that you might want on a site to the performance, because pages can be built in a million different ways, but if you want to throw every widget, for example, on a page, well, widgets take time to load. So the more you have, the more it's going to impact performance. So there's a little bit of expectation setting at the outset of initial projects, what you're starting from scratch. But the other element is for sites that are already built and you're reviewing, so potentially what it is talking about in terms of using tools to review your site and see where it might not be as performant as it could be. Now, I know you've got some experience in advising around this, but there's elements around, say, for example, lazy loading and getting quick wins through different aspects. What might you think of those?
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, obviously there's a lot of things you can implement, like smaller, quick wins that technical guys can implement onto any current website. But I'd say the most important thing is just to constantly review it, because if you're always adding content to the site, always getting your developers to make minor changes to things, your site speed does gradually start creeping up unless you keep an eye on it. So I'd say just every month just do a report on like Lighthouse or GT metrics and just see how things are being affected by what you're doing on a daily basis. And they'll just spit out loads of recommendations that you can then pass on to your developers and get to improve things.
And so when we talk about core web vitals around this, because obviously that affects your Google search rankings, is speed the only thing that core web vitals like takes on, or are there other elements that you really need to look at?
There is, but it's split into a few different areas. So like how fast the page loads like visually, but then how fast it actually becomes interactive. So there's a few different things. You might be sitting there watching a site load for like a couple of seconds, and yeah, you can see it, but you can't start scrolling down and clicking things yet. So there's a whole, there's loads of things within core web vitals that you need to look at. It's not just, oh, the website's, I can see it now, It's about making it usable within seconds. So it's probably a lot harder than it used to be before the whole core web vitals thing was launched. So, but it's a good thing. It's making marketers and owners of websites stay on their toes and provide better experiences. So,
yeah, and as you mentioned, there's tools out there that make it very easy for us to be able to review and keep on top of those things and not let them escalate too much where it really impacts the organization, and so we can stay on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, as a number one, anyone listening to this should have Google Search Console set up. So within there, you can just see what pages are failing, and you'll get notifications, every month that say you've got 30 pages that are failing your core web vitals, and then you can just go in there, you can check the errors, and then you can validate them in there, once you've put a fix in place or whatever. So it's just like we mentioned before, it's just having that data accessible to you and keeping on top of it. But there is other things that can be done as well. Like, we've implemented CDNs in the past for organisations. That's something you always mention to your clients. Just being able to actually, take save a version of a website and then deliver it at speed from a local servers. It's amazing, especially if you've got an international membership base.
Yeah, I think that it's very key, and I think there's other elements around site speed and core web vitals, or Google search or any search console really, in terms of security as well, which you've got to make sure that you stay on top of all those, like keeping the site secure, the pages being HTTPS, so you've got those relevant certificates on the site, so that you're enabling as much as possible for people to come to your site without any issues and any problems, and Google's really looking at your site and giving it as high a rank as possible. It's hard enough to rank high. You don't want to create scenarios where Google's giving you little black markers as well.
And it's easy stuff, it's just it's like maintaining a car, isn't it? At the end of the day, getting the car serviced.
I've seen a couple of your cars. Not sure about that.
Yeah, I'm not great at that. Websites though. No, that's what it's like, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? You've got to keep on top of it. You can't just build a site and it's going to be, highly performing for like 5-6 years. You've got to keep on top of it, really, and keep it maintained.
Yeah, I think that old saying of if you're standing still, you're going backwards is very much relevant here. And I suppose that kind of summarizes the 5 points we spoke about, but there's one additional one to really help drive down the value that you add as a membership organization, which is around creating networking opportunities. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that, Ida.
Yeah. Well, with COVID, I think a lot of membership organizations came to realization of the importance of this online touch. And when you can't go on a networking event, we had some webinars where people would be able to listen and tune in, maybe participate. But what came to light is that there's something called digital communities, where it's sort of a socializing area of your website or your portal, where all members have got access to pretty much, you as an organization can restrict or allow this, but to all members, and they can interact between themselves, but also they can interact with your organization, which gives them that full freedom of any sort of communication to be more like instant messaging, like you've got on LinkedIn, Facebook, and all of that. You can see people's profiles, you can create maybe some research groups if you've got a particular interest where you want to discuss certain things or work on a particular thing together. So I think this is a great opportunity for any membership organization who's looking to find a way to engage more with their members and to create that environment where members can easily interact with each other, because I think that's all it is nowadays.
Yeah, and I think that creating network opportunities is really... A lot of members of membership organisations want to feel part of a community. So when we talk about the musts, you mentioned earlier about people joining a membership organisation because they have to, you mentioned around career paths or whatever it may be. But a lot of value add that they see is being able to interact with people with that same either career or interest as they have. And creating those networking opportunities both online, but linking that with potentially offline networking opportunities is one of those value adds that maybe a lot of membership organisations miss out on. And it really is a good opportunity to help your members feel more as if they're part of something, which they are, and really transfer that knowledge and that value that they might have to others.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think it's a great thing to have out there. I think it's no longer nice to have; it's more of a must-have for the near future, really. So,
yeah,
go on.
and no, I'm just going to say, I think in summary, we've got 5 or 6 points that we think will really help add value to a membership organisation's digital platform and digital experience for their members, which are listen to your members, use analytics, and use user feedback.
Then it's content about making sure you show the value of your organization to all your members, shout out about your USPs, show your personality. We've got the navigation.
Yeah, make sure that's done in a structured way, that you're getting users to the end of whatever journey you want them to take and they're going to want to take.
Yeah, we've got accessibility. Make sure it covers all sorts of scenarios, and you make sure that your site is as compliant as possible. We know there's some restrictions and some reasons as to why it could not be doing all things in accessibility, but there's ways around it.
And then we've got site speed and constantly reviewing that alongside core web vitals to make sure your experience is good in the eyes of your users and Google.
Yeah, and then obviously try to create networking opportunities to help people really feel the true value of them as members and contributors to your community and your organisation.
Great.
So I think we've got that cracked. If there's any more, let us know what you think, and we'll see if we can take them on board and maybe bring them into a new podcast that we might do further down the line.